process where the decomposers break down the organic material into inorganic forms such as carbon dioxide, water and nutrients is called as decomposition. So detritus is nothing but the dead plant material that is present in the soil, and detrivores are the ones which break the dead plant material into smaller bits. So organisms occupy a particular place in the natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on chapter 14 of 2nd PUC, that is Ecosystem. I am Dr. Divya, Biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about ecosystem, wherein we learned the definition of ecosystem, we learned about stratification, and also we learned about one of the components of the ecosystem, that was productivity. In today's session, let us study about the remaining components of the ecosystem, that is the decomposition, the energy flow and the nutrient cycling. So to begin with, let us start studying with what is decomposition. So decomposition is nothing but the rotting of the material, whatever has fallen on the ground, right? So be it the plant's litter or the leaves of the plant that has fallen on the ground, or be it any dead animal or any other dead organism, all these because of the action of various microbes present in the soil and also because of the action of the earthworms that are present in the soil, they undergo decay and they undergo decomposition. So decomposition, the best friend it is for decomposition is earthworm, and hence earthworm is called as the farmer's friend. So earthworm being referred to as farmer's friend because earthworms, they usually feed on the dead matter that is present in the soil, especially they feed on the plant material that is there or fallen on the soil which is dead and decaying. So they can't feed the plant material as such. They have to break it down into smaller bits. So what the earthworm does is they help in breaking down of complex organic materials, as well as they also help in loosening of the soil, because the earthworm dwells inside the soil, right? Only at certain times, very rarely they come out of the soil, otherwise they are always buried in the ground. So when they move through the soil, they make the soil loose, that is the soil particles loose, therefore providing proper aeration to the plants growing there. So earthworms, that is why they are called as a farmer's friend, because they not only provide nutrients to the soil but also they help in improving the aeration of the soil. So similarly, there are some other decomposers such as the bacteria and all that, various microbes present in the soil which are called as the decomposers. These decomposers, they also break down the complex organic matter into inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide, water and nutrients, and this particular process is called as decomposition. So decomposition is facilitated by earthworms and some microbes which are called as decomposers, and the process where the decomposers break down the organic material into inorganic forms such as carbon dioxide, water and nutrients is called as decomposition. Now you know what decomposition is and what decomposers are. The organisms which bring about decomposition are called as decomposers. So next let us study about two important terms under decomposition, that is detritus and detrivores. So detritus is nothing but the dead plant material that is present in the soil, and detrivores are the ones which break the dead plant material into smaller bits. So therefore earthworms are called as detrivores, whereas other microorganisms which help in decomposition, they are called as the decomposers. So that is the difference between decomposers and detrivores. So talking about detritus. So detritus is nothing but the dead plant remains such as the leaves of the plant, the bark of the tree, the flowers of the plant, and not just that, even it includes the dead remains of the animals and also the fecal or the excreta matter of the animals. All these are called as the detritus. So, these are the raw material for decomposition, or in one word if I have to say, what is detritus? Detritus are nothing but the raw materials that are used for decomposition. And what are detrivores? Detrivores are the organisms, for example, earthworm in this particular case, which break down the detritus, that is, which break down the dead plant and animal remains into smaller particles are called as detrivores. So, one of the best examples is earthworm is a detrivore. So, now since we know the difference between decomposition, decomposers and detrivores and detritus, let us move on to studying about the decomposition process in detail, wherein different steps are involved in the decomposition process. So, let us look into what are the steps involved in decomposition. So, decomposition, the important steps in the process of decomposition are: one is fragmentation. The next step after fragmentation is leaching. After leaching, it is catabolism. Then it is humification, and then it is, the last one is mineralization. So, let's study each of these steps one by one. Fragmentation. You are quite familiar with this word, right? Fragmentation. Fragments in biology. Fragments means breaking something into smaller pieces or smaller bits, right? So, here what is broken down into smaller bits? The detritus is broken down into smaller particles or smaller bits. So, what is detritus? Detritus is nothing but the dead plant and the dead animal remains and all that are called as detritus. So, the detritus that are broken into smaller particles by what? By the detrivores will occur during the fragmentation. So, the dead plants and animal remains are broken down into smaller fragments under this particular process called as fragmentation. So, once they are broken into smaller fragments, the next step that comes is leaching. So, what happens in leaching? Here, water-soluble inorganic nutrients that are present in the fragmented materials or in the broken materials, they go down into the soil horizon and they get precipitated as unavailable salt. So, the leaching, whatever water-soluble substances that were present in the detritus, which were broken down into fragments, that will seep through the soil, and that particular process is called as leaching. After leaching, the next step is catabolism. So, here some of the bacteria and fungal enzymes. So, the soil will contain bacteria and fungi, right? So, these bacteria and fungi, they produce certain enzymes. So, these enzymes, they will break down or they will degrade the detritus into simpler inorganic substances. That is called as catabolism. So, what are the three steps? The first step is the fragmentation process. So, if you can see here, they have given this is the diagram taken from the NCERT textbook, wherein they have given the diagram of a tree here. So, all the leaves and all that wither from the trees will fall on the ground, right? So, those leaves will be eaten by the insects and other animals or herbivorous animals. After that, when it is eaten by the other animals or herbivores, it is broken down into smaller bits, right? So, this is broken down into smaller bits, and it is nothing but these are the detritus. They will be broken down into smaller bits, wherein fragmentation will occur here. Fragmentation. So, once fragmentation is nothing but broken down into smaller bits. After they are broken down into smaller bits, after fragmentation, the next step is the leaching. Here, whatever inorganic nutrients were there, inorganic nutrients, they will start leaching into the soil, and they will make the soil rich in organic matter because of leaching. Because they are water soluble, they will start leaching through the soil. And not just that, these detritus, which are broken into smaller fragments, will be consumed by the fungi that is growing on the ground, right? And these fungi, and also they will be consumed by the bacteria and all that. So these will start to release some enzymes. That enzyme will break down the fragmented pieces further into inorganic substances. That particular process that occurs here is called as catabolism. Now, after catabolism, the remaining two processes will occur. What are they? Let's look into. That is humification and mineralization. So, humification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in the soil. So, humification is nothing but it is a process which will actually lead to the accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance which is called as humus. So, what happens in humification? In simple terms to say, humus is formed. So, humus gets formed in humification, and this humus is highly resistant to microbial action. So, once the humus is formed, further decomposition will not take place. Why? If decomposition has to take place, fungi and bacteria has to involve itself in the process of decomposition. But this humus is so resistant to the bacteria and fungi or other microorganisms in the soil. Once humus is formed, the decomposition will completely come to a stop and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. So, because the action of the fungi and the microbes would have been reduced once the soil or once the decomposed material gets converted into humus by the process of humification. And being colloidal in nature, this particular humus, it serves as a reservoir of nature. So, this humus being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir or collection of nutrients. So, and these nutrients will be further used by the plants, and this humus is further degraded by some of the microbes, and those microbes, when they degrade the humus, it will lead to the release of some of the inorganic nutrients which is called as mineralization. So, here that is nutrients gets accumulated. Apart from that, there are some specific microbes which will break down the humus further to form inorganic nutrients, and this accumulation of the inorganic nutrient in the soil is called as mineralization. So, we had stopped here with catabolism in the previous slide, right? So, after catabolism, what happens? Again, all the minerals will or the decomposed material will get added, or it will leach into the soil. After that particular process, what happens? Here in this, before that, again there are some that is humification and mineralization will occur in this particular step, wherein humification, the decomposed material will further get converted into humus, and that humus, with the help of certain bacteria and or certain other microorganisms, will be broken down further to form inorganic nutrients, and that particular process called as mineralization. So, here both humification and mineralization will occur. Humification and mineralization occurs in this particular step. So, now the soil is rich in organic and inorganic nutrients. They will be again utilized by the plants. Again, the plants' leaves will wither, the cycle will continue. So, this is what happens in the case of decomposition. So, that is why decomposition is studied under the following steps. The first step being fragmentation, then comes leaching, then comes catabolism, then comes the mineralization and that is humification, and then comes the mineralization process. So, this is one important question in the exam. So, if you write about these 5 steps, clearly you will get along with the diagram. There is no need for drawing all this. If you write whatever running matter is there here, that if you write in the form of words, whatever it is given here, that if you write in the form of words, it is enough. You will get 5 marks easily. So next let's learn about what are the different factors that support decomposition. So decomposition is largely a oxygen dependent process, meaning if oxygen is there, then only decomposition can occur properly. So therefore it is a oxygen requiring process, and the rate of decomposition is controlled by the chemical composition of the detritus. So chemical composition of the detritus means what type of chemical the dead and decaying matter of the plants and animals contain. Based on that, the rate of decomposition, how much, to what extent or to what level decomposition occurs will depend on. And also decomposition depends on climatic conditions, that is a particular climatic condition. So we can say that the decomposition rate is low, and not just climatic condition, and as I told you what that particular detritus is made up of, based on that also decomposition will depend, the rate of decomposition. So the decomposition rate is slower, it is slow if the detritus is rich in lignin and it is rich in chitin, and the decomposition will take place in a faster rate if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugar. So therefore, depending on the chemical composition and depending on the climatic condition also, the rate of decomposition of the detritus will depend. Whatever that is plant and animal matter is there, if it contains lignin and chitin, then the decomposition will be slow. And if it contains nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugar, the decomposition rate will be fast. Why? Because sugar is one of the main source of nutrients for the bacteria and the fungi. So that is why decomposition will be fast during that particular time. And also temperature and the amount of water content present in the soil or the amount of moisture present in the soil, both of these also determine how fast or how slow the decomposition process takes place. So temperature and soil moisture are the important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of the soil microbes. So soil microbes, the action, because if the soil is well moistured to adequate amount, or if enough amount of water is there in the soil, then the microbes will increase their rate of decomposition. Like that, temperature also, moderate temperature will increase the rate of decomposition, and high temperature and very less water content will decrease the rate of decomposition. So therefore, temperature and soil moisture also decides how the rate of decomposition has to take place, because these two will have a direct effect on the soil microbes. So that is why. And warm and moist environment, as I told you, favor decomposition, whereas very low temperature and anaerobiosis, that is the absence of oxygen, will inhibit the decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials. They don't get converted into organic and inorganic nutrients, but instead, because the decomposition process will be slow because of the low temperature and unavailability of oxygen, the decomposition rate will slow down drastically, and it will lead to only accumulation of the organic materials and not their further conversion or further mineralization process will not occur. So these are the factors that support decomposition. So the factors that support decomposition are the chemical factors that are present in the detritus and the climatic conditions such as temperature and moisture of the soil, and all these are the important factors that support the decomposition process. So next, let us study about the next important component in an ecosystem, that is energy flow. So except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem. So deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem is, the temperature there is always warm because it is always subjected to certain volcanic eruptions and all that, and the water there is always bubbling and boiling to some extent. So the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem is completely different when compared to the energy flow in the other kinds of ecosystem. Why? Because we all know that deep sea means, into that deep sea the sun's rays will not reach. And for energy, the first main important thing for the flow of energy is the sun, right? Because the sun's energy will flow into the plants energy, that is to the producers, from the producers to the consumers, like that it will continue. Now in the deep sea, if the sun itself is not reaching there, then how will the flow of energy take place? So therefore the energy flow is quite different in the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem when compared to all the other ecosystems on the earth. And of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of it is photosynthetically active radiation. So we all know that the sun emits high amounts of radiation, right? Out of that high amounts of radiation that the sun emits, only 50% of the radiation is photosynthetically active radiation. Means only 50% of the solar radiation can be used for photosynthesis, because only 50% is photosynthetically active. And plants and photosynthetic bacteria, which are called as the autotrophs. So plants are also called as autotrophs, and the photosynthetic bacteria are also called as autotrophs, because they are capable of fixing the or making their own food, right? So these autotrophs, they fix the sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. That is, they fix the, you have studied about this in your first PUC under photosynthesis of plants, that particular chapter, how carbon dioxide, using simple raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water, and in the presence of the sun's energy, how food is produced by the plants, right? How it gets converted into glucose, how glucose is formed. All that we have studied. So what did we understand now? Among the 100% radiation emitted by the sun, only 50% of the radiation is photosynthetically active. And plants and photosynthetic bacteria, which are called as the autotrophs, they fix the sun's radiant energy in order to make food. So therefore the sun's radiant energy will flow into the plant and the photosynthetic bacteria and convert it into food from simple inorganic materials such as carbon dioxide and water. And though 50% of the sun's radiation is photosynthetically active, out of that 50%, only 2 to 10% of radiation will be, or 2 to 10% of photosynthetically active radiation will be captured by the plants or absorbed by the plants, and this small amount of energy is enough for sustaining or maintaining the entire living world. That is why we can grow some plants even indoor, and that is why some plants can even thrive under huge canopies of the forest. It is because only 2 to 10% of radiation, that is photosynthetically active radiation, if it is made available to the plant, it is enough. So much it will use for photosynthesis, and that is why 50% is not needed. Out of that, only 2 to 10% is needed. So it is very important to know how the solar energy is captured by the plants and how that energy flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. Because we all know that when the energy flows through different organisms, that is when the energy flows from the sun to the plants, it will be of different capacity. And when it reaches the consumers, some of the energy would have been lost or given back to the environment, and only a part of the energy will move to the consumers. From the consumers, if it moves to the next food chain, again a part of energy is lost. So that is how the energy keeps on changing during its flow in a cycle or in a food chain or a food web. So all organisms are dependent for their food on producers, that is the green plants, either directly or indirectly, right? So when they depend on the producers, the energy will flow into them. So let's study about the producers now. So producers are nothing but they are the green plants that are present in the ecosystem. So producers are the green plants which are nothing but the autotrophs. So in a terrestrial ecosystem, the major producers are herbaceous and woody plants, whereas in an aquatic ecosystem, the various species like phytoplanktons, algae and some of the higher plants that are present at the bottom of the pond are The major producers. We have studied this in the previous session, right? While studying about pond ecosystem, we came to know about this. So therefore, producers can be either the green plants, which are herbaceous or woody, and they can be the water-dwelling plants such as the phytoplanktons, the algae, and some of the higher plants in the pond. Next, talking about consumers. What are the consumers? Those organisms, heterotrophs are the consumers. Those organisms which feed on the producers or the autotrophs are called as the consumers or the heterotrophs. So here all animals are consumers, right? Because all animals depend on plants either directly or indirectly for their food needs. And they are hence called as consumers, and therefore they are also called as heterotrophs because they depend on other organisms for their food. And if they feed on the producers, that is the plants, they are called as the primary consumers. Now here, primary consumers are the herbivorous animals. Secondary consumers are the carnivorous animals. Tertiary consumers are the omnivorous animals, right? Like that it goes in a ecological pyramid here. So they are called primary consumers. So ecological pyramid and all, in the coming session we'll learn about it. So if they feed on the producers, that is the plants, such organisms are called as primary consumers. And if the animals eat other animals, which in turn eat on the plant, or in simple words if I have to say, and if the carnivores eat the herbivores, then the carnivores will become the secondary consumers. Likewise, tertiary consumers will also be there. That is, if the omnivores feed on the carnivores, then it will become a tertiary consumer. Like this, the chain increases. We'll talk about these two, that is primary consumer, secondary consumer and all that. So primary consumers will be herbivores, as I told you, because these are the ones which are feeding directly on the plant. They will be the primary consumer. And some common herbivores are insects, birds, mammals in terrestrial ecosystem, and mollusks in the or fishes in the aquatic ecosystem. And the consumers that feed on these herbivores are the carnivores, and they are the secondary consumers, or they can be also called as the primary consumers. But though they are considered secondary consumers, usually it is retained as primary consumers or primary carnivores itself, or we can call it as the secondary consumers. We'll keep it as secondary consumers. And those animals that depend on primary carnivores for food, or those which depend on, if you get confused, you can also write it as those which depend on secondary consumers for food are called secondary carnivores. So we have or you can also call it as the tertiary consumers. We can make this as tertiary consumers. Nothing wrong in writing like this. Tertiary consumers. So primary carnivores are the secondary consumers, and the secondary like how we have the primary carnivores, we have the secondary carnivores which can be the tertiary consumers. So in your textbook they have given this particular chart wherein the grass is plant, it is a autotroph. So that is the producer. And next we have the goat which feeds on the grass, that is the herbivore. They will be the primary consumer. Then the man who feeds on the goat, who is a omnivore, obviously it is a secondary consumer. So that is how the energy flows. So when the energy flows from the producer to the secondary consumer, until it reaches the secondary consumer, the energy level will get decreased, because a part of energy gets lost or given back to the environment in every time it flows. So that is why energy is lost from one organism to another organism. So this was about the energy flow in an ecosystem. So next let's study about the detritus food chain. So the detritus food chain, obviously as the name itself suggests, detritus food chain. So detritus is nothing but the dead organic matter in the soil. So therefore the detritus food chain begins with the dead organic matter. and it is made up of the detritus food chain consists of decomposers, and these decomposers are the heterotrophs, right? Because they are the heterotrophs because they feed on the plant material that has fallen on the ground or the animal material that has fallen on the ground. So they are always the heterotrophic organisms such as the fungi and the bacteria. So they meet their energy and nutrient requirement by breaking down or by degrading the dead organic matter or the detritus. So what is there on the ground? On the ground, the detritus is there, that is the dead organic matter is there. On the dead organic matter, the heterotrophs will act upon, wherein they'll break down the dead organic matter into smaller bits, therefore degrading the dead organic matter or the detritus. And therefore, these organisms that is the bacteria and the fungi which break down the detritus into organic which helps in the degradation of the dead organic matter or detritus, they are also called as the saprotrophs. So saprotrophs, wherein sapro means to decompose. So what are saprotrophs? Those organisms which are capable of decomposing the detritus, they are called as the saprotrophs. So decomposers, what they do is they secrete certain digestive enzymes. And these digestive enzymes are the ones that we have studied this, right? When studying about that is a food chain, that is energy flow or decomposition flow chart. When we had studied about this, right? So here it is also called as the detritus food chain. So decomposers, they are the ones such as the fungi and the bacteria or the other microbes that are present in the soil. They secrete some digestive enzymes, and these digestive enzymes are capable of breaking down the dead and waste materials into simple inorganic materials which are absorbed by them later on, and they absorb it and give it back to the soil in the form of humus. And that humus, again, what will happen to the humus? The humus will again be broken down into smaller bits, wherein they will they'll form organic and inorganic nutrients by a process which is called as mineralization, that will be utilized by the plant. So that is what happens in the detritus food chain. So to write about detritus food chain and writing about the decomposition process, both is one and the same here. Next, let's talk about trophic level. Knowing about trophic level is important because so far we learnt about the producers, the consumers, and in the consumers we learnt about the primary consumers, the secondary consumer, the tertiary consumers, and the energy flow through this, right? So to know about the energy flow through this, knowing the trophic level or knowing the hierarchy of organisms in that particular trophic level is very, very important. So organisms occupy a particular place in the natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. So here, based on what type of nutrition they consume or what type of food they consume, the organisms occupy a specific place in the food chain, and that place is called as the trophic level. So here, different organisms, plants are in a different level, herbivores in a different, carnivores in a different, omnivores in a different, like that it continues, right? So here, the energy flow always starts from the lower trophic level and it moves to the higher trophic level. So because they are placed at different levels, based on what type of food they consume, what type of nutrition they consume. So based on that, they occupy different levels in the food chain. That level is actually called as trophic level. So here you can see different levels, right, from producers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. So these are the different trophic levels. So always here you should understand that the first trophic level is always occupied by the producers. That is, the producers belong to the first trophic level. Then the herbivores, which are the primary consumers, they belong to the second trophic level. And the carnivores, which are the secondary consumers, they belong to the third trophic level, and the omnivores to the fourth trophic level, like that it will continue. Say for example, here producers, they are the plants which forms the first trophic level, plants such as phytoplanktons, grasses, trees, etc. If it is a terrestrial ecosystem, it is grass and trees. If it is aquatic ecosystem, it is phytoplankton. So, the producers will be consumed by the consumers, wherein the energy will flow from the producer to the primary consumer, and therefore the primary consumers are the herbivores, which forms the second trophic level. Herbivores such as zooplankton if it is an aquatic ecosystem, grasshopper and cow if it is a terrestrial ecosystem. Next, the primary consumers will be eaten by the secondary consumers, that is the carnivores. So, which forms the third trophic level. Therefore, energy is flowing from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer. And if it is an aquatic ecosystem, the secondary consumer is the fishes. If it is a terrestrial ecosystem, it is the birds and the wolf. Next, moving on to the secondary consumer will be eaten by the tertiary consumer, which will form the top carnivore, that is the fourth trophic level, and man and lion. All these are carnivores, right, or omnivores, or you can call it as top carnivores or omnivores. So, they form the tertiary consumers and they occupy the highest level in the ecosystem. So, here also plants are more, the primary consumers are lesser than the plants, secondary consumers are lesser than the primary consumers, tertiary consumers are lesser in number than the secondary consumer, and they occupy, depending on the food habit, they occupy different positions in the food chain, and that particular position is called as the trophic levels. So, this is about trophic level. So, when an organism die, it is converted into detritus. So, which organisms? In each of the trophic level also the organisms will die, right? The producers, the consumers, all those in each trophic level, they will die. So, when they die, it is converted into detritus, or it is converted into dead biomass that serves as the energy source for decomposers. So, therefore, decomposers are present during each stages, and organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demands, that I have told you, because energy, it flows from the producers and unidirectionally towards the upper trophic level it flows. Therefore, all the organisms depend on the organisms below, one level below them, one trophic level below them. So, there is one more word that we have to understand here, which is very important. This is called a standing crop. What is the standing crop? So, each trophic level has a certain mass of living material, right? In producers, there is a certain amount of plants present. In primary consumers, certain amounts of herbivores are there. In secondary consumers, certain amounts of carnivores are there, right? So, in each trophic level, a certain group of living material at a particular time is present. So, at that particular time, how much living material is present, that is called as the standing crop. Say for example, plants are there which at the lowermost trophic level. Those plants will be eaten by the herbivores. After the herbivores has eaten the plants, how much amount of plant is still standing or remaining alive in the first trophic level, they will be called as the standing crop. Similarly, in each trophic level, how much organisms will be remaining after consumption by the next organisms, it is called as the standing crop. So, the standing crop is usually measured as the mass of living organism, or the biomass of living organism, or the number of living organisms in a unit area. And the biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. So, here how is the biomass? Either the number count can be taken, or the weight of that particular whole organism, standing crop, can be taken, which will give you the exact value of the standing crop at each trophic level. So, if we take the weight, usually the fresh and the dry weights are usually taken to measure the biomass of the standing crop at each trophic level. So, next, talking about the energy flow through different trophic levels. So the number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as the transfer of energy follows 10% law. So what is this 10% law? In a grassland ecosystem or in a grazing ecosystem, a 10% law is followed during the energy flow. What is this? So the 10% law means only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. Remember, I had told you, as and when the energy flows from one trophic level to the other trophic level, a part of the energy is lost or given back to the environment. How much? So therefore, after it is lost, how much amount of energy will flow? Only 10% of the energy will flow from each trophic level. So from the producers, only 10% will flow to the consumers, that is primary consumers. From primary consumers, only 10% will flow to the secondary consumers, and so on, like that. So that is why the energy flow follows a 10% law in each trophic level. And in nature it is possible to have so many levels, such as the producers, the herbivores, the primary carnivore, which is the carnivore, that is the secondary consumer in a grazing food chain. Say we can explain it here. Say for example, the plants. So here plants, they form the first trophic level and they are the producers, right? They are the autotrophs, they are the producers, the green plants. They will utilize the sun's energy. Will they utilize all the sun's energy? No. Some part of the sun's energy will be lost in the form of heat, and out of that only 2 to 10% will be utilized by the plants. Now the plant is having some of the energy in it. That energy will flow to the second trophic level, that is to the primary consumers, which are the herbivores. So do you think all the 10% energy will flow to the primary consumers? No. 10% of the energy will be lost in the form of heat, or some amount of energy will be lost in the form of heat, and only 10% of energy will be transferred to the next organism. Next, we have the third trophic level, wherein we have the secondary consumers or the secondary carnivore. Here they have taken the bird. The bird will feed on this particular earthworm. Let's consider this to be the earthworm. It's an insect, right? The bird will feed on this earthworm. So when the bird feeds on the earthworm, again here, only 10% energy goes into the bird and remaining is lost in the form of heat. Next here, the bird will be eaten by the fourth trophic level, that is the tertiary consumer, which is the top carnivore. It is the omnivore. Here we have vulture here. So here also again, when the vulture feeds on the bird, only 10% of energy will move to the vulture and the remaining will go off as heat. So that is how. Here also the same thing. Again it is lost. So when the bird dies and decays or whatever, it will be eaten by the insects and microbes that are there. During that time also some amount of energy is lost. So that is how the energy flows in a food chain. So this is about the flow of energy at different trophic levels here. So this is about the flow of energy at different trophic levels. So this was about this particular session wherein we studied about the two components of the ecosystem. That is the first component, which was decomposition, we had studied in the previous session. So in this particular session, we have studied about the components of the ecosystem, wherein in the previous session, we had already studied about the productivity. In today's session, we studied about the consumers and we studied about the energy flow. So I hope you understood about this, wherein we learnt about the trophic levels, how energy flow occurs, and during the flow of energy, how a part of energy is lost and only 10% is transferred from one organism to another, which is called as the 10% rule or 10% law. So in the next coming session, we shall study about ecological pyramids. So in ecological pyramids also, the energy flow will be seen. So all that we'll study there again, and also we'll study about ecological succession, which is a very important or interesting topic which you find to see every day when you're traveling. So this is an interesting topic, ecological succession. So we shall meet again in the coming session with these two topics. Thank you.